When Representative Lauren Boebert stepped into the congressional hearing that morning, she was convinced she was about to deliver a humiliating blow to Jasmine Crockett. But what unfolded moments later stunned everyone in the room and completely changed how political confrontations are viewed today. If you want to see how a true professional handles political attacks with intelligence and calm, this is a moment worth watching. Make sure to like and subscribe for more powerful clips the mainstream media rarely highlights. The atmosphere inside the hearing room was already tense when Lauren Boebert finally took the microphone. She had been preparing for this moment, believing she had the perfect strategy ready. With her papers spread out in front of her and a confident grin, she prepared to launch what she thought would be a devastating strike at Representative Jasmine Crockett. The C-SPAN cameras zoomed in, capturing every detail of Boebert's confident expression. She adjusted her glasses, cleared her throat, and leaned toward the microphone. The room grew silent. "Representative Crockett," Boebert began, her voice projecting across the chamber. "I've been looking forward to addressing some troubling statements you've made recently." The cameras cut to Jasmine Crockett, who sat calmly at her desk. Unlike many who had been put on the spot by Boebert in previous hearings, Crockett didn't flinch. She simply sorted her notes with a relaxed posture, as if she had expected this moment and prepared thoroughly for it. What happened next would become one of the most watched political exchanges of the year. Shared millions of times across social media, Lauren Boebert, the Republican from Colorado, had developed a strong reputation for confrontational politics. She was known for her bold tone and dramatic statements, making her one of the most polarizing figures in Congress. Her supporters loved her outspoken America First message and her willingness to challenge Democrats head-on. Her critics saw her approach as divisive and lacking serious policy depth. Before joining Congress, Boebert became nationally recognized as a restaurant owner who defied COVID-19 restrictions and promoted open-carry firearms. Her quick rise to political prominence was fueled by conservative voters who admired her fiery style. Facing her in this high-stakes moment was Representative Jasmine Crockett, a Democrat from Texas and a former civil rights attorney. Crockett had spent years fighting for voting rights and criminal justice reform, earning respect from legal experts and grassroots activists. Her shift into politics came after a career defined by careful preparation, strong legal arguments, and the ability to stay composed under pressure. Since entering Congress, Crockett became known for her deep policy knowledge and her ability to challenge misinformation without resorting to personal attacks. The stakes in this confrontation were enormous because the hearing focused on election integrity, one of the most debated topics in American politics. Republicans stressed security issues while Democrats emphasized voter access and protection of rights. The outcome of the debate could influence legislation impacting how millions of Americans vote. For Boebert, this was her moment to push a narrative and strengthen her political brand. For Crockett, this was a chance to defend voting rights using facts and legal expertise. The room was full. Lawmakers, staff, journalists, and citizens had all gathered to watch. C-SPAN cameras rolled, and both representatives' social media teams were ready to clip any moment that could go viral. As Boebert began her questioning, she believed she had found a weakness she could exploit. What she didn't know was that Crockett had already predicted this line of attack. She had spent weeks preparing for exactly this moment, gathering documents, organizing legal arguments, and ensuring she could respond with clarity and precision instead of another chaotic argument with both sides shouting past each other. This exchange would become something very different, a clear moment where preparation, facts, and logic completely overshadowed political theatrics. Representative Crockett, Boebert continued, raising her voice with confidence. "You recently claimed there is no proof of widespread voter fraud. Yet we have thousands of affidavits from citizens who say they saw irregularities. How can you ignore their experiences?" The room grew tense. Some Republicans nodded in approval. Democrats watched carefully. The chair leaned forward, anticipating the clash. Crockett paused before responding, her voice calm and even. "Thank you for that question, Representative Boebert," she said. "I'm grateful for the chance to address this issue. Boebert smirked, assuming Crockett was unsure how to respond. She sat back, waiting for what she expected would be a weak or uncertain answer. When we talk about election security, Crockett continued, we must separate affidavits from actual evidence tested in court. As a former attorney, I can tell you those are very different things. Boebert quickly interrupted. So you're saying thousands of citizens are lying? Their sworn statements mean nothing? The interruption was clearly intentional in effort to disrupt Crockett's explanation. Several Republicans nodded in agreement with Boebert's tactic. But Crockett didn't react emotionally. If I may finish, Crockett said calmly. I'm not doubting anyone's sincerity. But when these affidavits were presented in more than 60 court cases across several states, judges appointed by both Republican and Democratic presidents found they did not prove widespread fraud that could change election results. Boebert was ready with a dramatic move. She lifted a folder in the air as the camera zoomed in. Representative. Boebert lifted a stack of papers and declared that she had documentation of cases she claimed were ignored. By Democrats' cases she insisted were never properly examined. She presented them dramatically as if they were explosive evidence. The chairman immediately stepped in, asking her to submit the documents to the committee for official review. Gladly, Boebert replied, handing them off to a staffer. Then she turned back toward Crockett, her tone sharper than before. Let me ask you something directly, Boebert pressed. Will you admit that our elections have weaknesses that must be fixed? Or is your position that everything is perfect and nothing at all needs improvement? It was a loaded question crafted to force Crockett into a corner. If she admitted vulnerabilities, Boebert could twist it into an acknowledgement that fraud was possible. If she didn't, Boebert could accuse her of denying reality. The room grew still as everyone waited to see how Crockett would respond, but Crockett didn't flinch. She nodded calmly, as if the question strengthened her argument rather than weakened it. That's actually a very important question, Crockett said, her voice steady. And it's exactly why we need honest discussions instead of political sound bites. She lifted a folder of her own. This contains testimony from cybersecurity and election experts, including officials selected by former President Trump, who stated clearly that the 2020 election was the most secure in our nation's history. She paused before adding, but that doesn't mean improvements aren't possible. Crockett opened the folder and pulled out several highlight-marked reports. I've spent a great deal of time looking at election systems across all 50 states. No system is flawless, and that's why I've supported bipartisan measures to strengthen security and protect voter access. For the first time, Boebert appeared caught off balance. She quickly regrouped and fired another shot. Nice words, Representative Crockett. But your party keeps blocking voter ID laws that ensure only eligible citizens can vote. If you care so much about security, how do you justify that? A wave of murmurs moved through the room. The voter ID debate was one of the most charged arguments in modern politics, and Boebert clearly believed she had hit a winning point. Crockett set her water down and looked directly at her. I'm glad you brought up voter ID, she said. Because there's a lot of misinformation about where Democrats actually stand. She pulled out another document. This is House Bill 1365, which I personally co-sponsored. If you look at Section 4, you'll see it includes secure voter identification. What we oppose are excessively restrictive ID rules that make it harder for elderly, rural, and low-income citizens to vote even, though they are completely eligible. Boebert blinked, visibly surprised. She had not expected Crockett to reference a bill she helped write. But Crockett wasn't finished. My office has reviewed data from several states, Crockett continued. And what we found is that strict photo ID laws block far more legitimate voters than fraud cases they claim to prevent. We should absolutely secure our elections, but not at the cost of denying Americans their right to vote. I'd be more than willing to share this research with you so we can discuss solutions that address both concerns. The tone in the room shifted again. What started as a political attack had turned into a detailed policy discussion, and Crockett was clearly leading it. Boebert tried to pull the narrative back to punchy talking points. The American people aren't interested in complicated policy lectures, she said. They want to know why Democrats seem more focused on making voting easy instead of preventing cheating. The line was clearly designed for social media, a short, sharp clip sure to be shared online. Some Republicans nodded approvingly. But Crockett gave a small smile, as if she had been waiting for that exact line. With respect, Representative Boebert, the American people absolutely understand complex issues. And since you brought up specific examples of fraud, let's talk about those documents you just submitted. The shift caught Boebert off guard. The folder she had turned in contained cases she routinely referenced on TV and conservative media shows. She assumed Crockett wouldn't know the details. She was wrong. These cases you cited, Crockett continued calmly, pulling another set of papers from her folder. I actually took time to investigate every single one after you discussed them in your Fox News interview last month. A ripple of surprise moved through the room. Crockett held up the first paper. This is the full transcript from the Johnson County situation you mentioned. Officials determined that the so-called ballot dump was a simple clerical error that was corrected during the regular canvassing process. No fraudulent votes were ever counted. She lifted a second document. And here's the official report from the Secretary of State in Arizona regarding the Maricopa County case. It confirms that signature verification worked exactly as it was supposed to, and that bipartisan observers were present throughout the process. Boebert's posture stiffened. Her confidence was slipping. Crockett's preparation was far deeper than she had anticipated. The point isn't the individual cases, Boebert insisted, trying to redirect. The point is that the American people no longer trust our elections, and your party doesn't seem to care about restoring that trust. Crockett nodded. On that part, Representative Boebert, we are in total agreement. Trust in our democracy is crucial, and that is exactly why accuracy matters. She looked around the room. When public officials repeat claims that have been investigated and proven false, that damages trust. And when laws are passed that make it harder for eligible citizens to vote, that damages trust too. The chairman checked the clock. Representative Boebert, he said, you have 1 minute remaining. Realizing her original strategy had failed, Boebert shuffled through her notes and prepared for one last attempt at regaining control of the exchange. Representative. Boebert leaned forward and delivered what she clearly believed was her strongest accusation yet. Representative Crockett, isn't it true that before joining Congress, you represented groups that opposed efforts to remove non-citizens from voter rolls? How can Americans trust that you care about election integrity when your past work shows the opposite? The accusation was loaded with false implications, and for a brief second, a flicker of disbelief crossed Crockett's face. She quickly regained her calm expression as several members of the committee leaned in. Sensing that the exchange had reached a turning point, Crockett adjusted her stack of documents with deliberate care, showing no rush despite the weight of the accusation. The room fell silent, so silent that even small sounds echoed as everyone waited to see how she would respond. Representative Boebert, Crockett began. Her voice strong and steady. Thank you for the chance to correct the record. Her tone was respectful, but there was a sharpened focus in her words that immediately commanded attention. She continued, the way you frame that question misrepresents the work I did as an attorney. She reached into her folder and lifted a bound legal brief. Before I ever ran for office, I worked on voting rights cases to protect eligible voters from being mistakenly purged due to flawed data systems or outdated matching tools. This brief, she said, holding the document up for everyone to see, is from the case Johnson v. Bradley, with permission from the chair. I'd like to read a portion from page 17. The chairman nodded. And the room remained absolutely still. Crockett read aloud. Plaintiffs fully support the state's legitimate interest in maintaining accurate voter rolls that exclude ineligible voters, including non-citizens. Our concern lies only with the reliability of the methodology, which has incorrectly flagged eligible voters at unacceptable rates. Looking up from the text, she clarified, our legal position fully supported removing non-citizens from voter rolls. What we challenged was the flawed process that targeted eligible voters due to technological errors. She placed the brief on the desk and pulled out another document. Here is the statistical analysis our legal team submitted. The matching system being used at the time had an error rate of 27%, and that's not political spin. That's verified data. Our concern wasn't partisan. It was constitutional. Boebert tried to interrupt with, "The point still stands," but Crockett continued with the calm authority of someone who had spent years presenting arguments in front of judges. "If I may finish, Representative," she said firmly. The court reviewed all the evidence and ruled in our favor in a 7-2 decision. Judges appointed by presidents from both parties agreed that the purge process was legally defective and needed major revision. She lifted another document. "This is the revised policy that was implemented after the ruling. My clients supported these reforms because they protected the goal of removing ineligible voters while adding checks to prevent accidental removals of eligible citizens. Her systematic dismantling of the accusation was visibly affecting the room. Several Republicans who had been nodding along moments earlier now shifted awkwardly. Democrats listened intently, recognizing the significance of the moment, but Crockett wasn't finished. "Representative Boebert," she said, turning directly toward her, "I've noticed a repeated pattern today where your claims about my record don't match the documented facts. This is troubling because spreading inaccurate information, especially from elected officials directly, contributes to the loss of trust in our democratic processes that you say concerns you." Boebert attempted to retake control. "The American people know what's going on. You can hide behind legal language all you want, but—" Crockett gently shook her head. "These aren't technicalities. These are verified facts, and they matter. They matter because elections are the backbone of our democracy." Then she paused, gathering a final set of papers. The chairman leaned forward instinctively, sensing she was about to deliver something important. "Given your repeated statements today, Representative," Crockett said, "I believe you may have been provided with incomplete or incorrect information. So, in the interest of a productive and honest discussion, my office prepared a fact sheet that addresses every election fraud claim you've raised today." She handed copies to committee staff. "It includes the findings from every official investigation, complete with source citations." The committee briefly broke from the tension as members opened the fact sheet. A few Republican representatives looked surprised by what they were reading, even whispering to their aides. Boebert, completely thrown off balance, waved a hand dismissively. More bureaucratic excuses that ignore what people are really worried about. Crockett responded with quiet authority. "Representative Boebert, I took the time to address your concerns with solid evidence. I hope you'll review this information with the same seriousness. Because elections must be secure, open, and trusted by the public. We absolutely should ask questions, but we must also accept answers when they're supported by overwhelming evidence." She deliberately repeated the phrase, "overwhelming evidence," echoing the language used in dozens of court rulings dismissing election fraud claims. It was a precise, pointed signal, one that everyone in the room recognized instantly. Several legal scholars sitting in the room instantly recognized what had just happened and exchanged quiet, knowing looks. Sensing that the atmosphere had completely shifted, the chairman announced, "Representative Boebert, your time has ended." He then turned to the other side. "Representative Crockett, would you like to add anything before we continue?" Crockett, who had remained standing the entire time, nodded calmly. "Just one more point, Mr. Chairman. Even though we strongly disagreed today, I want to make it clear that I respect Representative Boebert's dedication to election integrity. That is a principle shared by every member of this committee, regardless of political party." She then looked directly at Boebert and added, "I truly hope today's discussion can be the start of a more constructive dialogue about strengthening both election security and voter access. My door is always open for conversations built on facts and mutual respect." The cameras caught Boebert's reaction, complicated mix of surprise and uncertainty as she processed the unexpected olive branch after such a detailed rebuttal. She had entered the hearing expecting a heated argument that would energize her supporters. Instead, She found herself challenged not only with precise facts but with a tone that left her without a straightforward comeback. As Crockett gathered her papers and returned to her seat, a wave of murmurs moved through the committee room. Journalists were already typing rapidly, fully aware that they had just witnessed something far beyond the usual congressional back and forth. This wasn't the kind of partisan clash filled with noise but no substance. It was a clear demonstration of how strong preparation and accurate information could reshape the entire direction of political conversation. The chairman called for a 10-minute break, but very few people stepped outside. Members from both parties walked toward Crockett to examine her documents more closely. A few Republican aides were taking photos of her fact sheet, while Democratic representatives were already discussing how the exchange might influence upcoming recommendations from the committee inside the press section. Reporters were preparing their headlines. They quickly realized the story had changed from another election security dispute to something much more significant, a rare moment where verified facts overwhelmed political talking points. Online clips of the exchange were spreading at lightning speed. Legal experts, election officials, and policy analysts from both sides began confirming the accuracy of Crockett's statements. The hashtag #FactsMatter started trending. Globally, alongside videos of her strongest moments, Boebert stayed at her seat during the break, speaking urgently with her staff, who appeared to be cross-checking Crockett's fact sheet against their own notes. The look on her face suggested she understood that the confrontation she intended to dominate had instead placed her credibility at risk, especially on an issue central to her political identity. When the hearing resumed, observers noticed a clear change in the room. Questions from both Democrats and Republicans were more detailed, more policy-focused, and noticeably less partisan. For the first time in a long while, the priority in the room seemed to shift away from political soundbites and toward factual accuracy. At the center of that shift was Representative Jasmine Crockett, who quietly organized her materials, showing no signs of gloating. She simply looked like someone who came ready to work with precision and integrity, and in doing so, reminded everyone of what a serious political debate can look like. The effects of the Crockett-Boebert exchange traveled far beyond Capitol Hill within hours. Clips of the hearing had gone viral on multiple platforms, with the most replayed moment being Crockett's careful explanation of the legal document that directly contradicted Boebert's claims. By evening, major news outlets were covering the story. CNN ran the headline, "Representative Crockett's fact-check moment dominates the hearing." Fox News took a more reserved approach with tense hearing on election security raises. New questions. Even in a divided media environment, most outlets agreed on one thing. The facts in Crockett's presentation were solid. Political commentators across the spectrum pointed out how unusual it was to see such a decisive moment in a congressional hearing. A former Justice Department official on MSNBC noted, "What made Crockett's response so striking wasn't just her preparation. It was the way she anticipated every angle of attack and brought the exact evidence needed to counter it." On a conservative talk show, a Republican strategist admitted, "Boebert walked into a trap she created herself. She tried to win with broad statements, but Crockett showed up with case-specific details. It's basic political strategy. Never ask a question you don't already know the answer to." By the next morning, coverage had shifted toward analyzing the larger debate on election security. Several newspapers ran thorough fact checks comparing the statements from both representatives, and most concluded that Crockett's references to voting rights cases and legal precedent were accurate. The Washington Post published a major article titled "The Crockett-Boebert Exchange: When Preparation Meets Performance," which quickly became one of the month's most read pieces. Surprisingly, some moderate Republicans began distancing themselves from the more extreme claims of widespread election fraud. One GOP congressman from Michigan told CNN, "Yesterday's hearing reminded us that precision matters. Yes, election concerns exist, but they must be based on verifiable facts." For Boebert, the political fallout was mixed. While her most loyal supporters stayed firmly behind her, others in conservative media were more critical. One well-known right-leaning columnist wrote, Boebert's performance showed what happens when talking points replace deep understanding. She accidentally helped the argument she was trying to defeat. At first, Boebert responded forcefully. She posted on social media, "The Washington establishment doesn't want us questioning election integrity. I won't back down. Americans deserve the truth." But as more fact checks confirmed Crockett's accuracy, her stance began to shift. 2 days later on Fox News, she softened her message, "Everyone wants secure and accessible elections. My goal has always been accurate vote counting. If Representative Crockett truly wants bipartisan solutions, I'm ready to talk." For Representative Crockett, what followed the hearing brought a surge of national attention. Her online presence exploded, gaining more than 200,000 new followers in the week after the exchange. Major TV networks began requesting interviews, and her congressional office reported a huge jump in supportive calls and emails, including many from Republicans who said they appreciated her commitment to verified facts. In her first interview, after the hearing on MSNBC's Morning Joe, Crockett downplayed the personal drama of the confrontation. "This isn't about me or Representative Boebert," she said. "It's about making sure that our conversations around something as essential as our elections are grounded in truth, not fear. My years as an attorney taught me that evidence matters. That's all I brought to the table, evidence." When asked whether she had purposely set a trap for Boebert, Crockett simply smiled. "I wouldn't describe it that way. I just prepared well." When you've worked on voting rights cases for years, you develop deep familiarity with the issues. Based on past hearings, I suspected certain topics might come up, so I made sure I could address them clearly and accurately. The hearing had effects that went far beyond the two representatives. At the next committee meeting, the chairman announced that future hearings would include testimony from bipartisan election officials and voting rights experts who could offer technical explanations on voter roll procedures. 3 weeks later, a group of lawmakers from both parties, including several who had been present during the exchange, announced a new working group designed to draft election security legislation. Their statement made clear that every proposal would be judged on evidence and real-world feasibility instead of political talking points. Within political strategy meetings on both sides of the aisle, the exchange quickly became a teaching moment. Democratic strategists encouraged members to follow what they started calling the Crockett approach, meaning anticipating attacks and preparing comprehensive, fact-based replies rather than reacting defensively. Republican strategists, meanwhile, sent internal memos advising their members to thoroughly fact-check every example before using it in public hearings and to expect that their Democratic counterparts might now arrive with detailed rebuttals ready to go. Training sessions for new congressional staff also began using the exchange as a case study. Crockett's performance was highlighted as an example of disciplined preparation, while Boebert's showing became a reminder of the risks of relying too heavily on broad talking points without verifying the details. Observers noticed a clear shift in committee hearings that followed. Lawmakers from both parties began referencing court cases, citing data, and referring to specific election administration procedures. No one wanted to become the next representative caught on camera making easily disproven claims. 6 months later, the bipartisan working group unveiled its election security bill. The legislation sought to improve both security and accessibility. It included increased funding for modernizing voter roll systems, stronger accuracy measures, expanded secure identification options, including verified non-photo IDs, and standardized audit procedures to confirm election results. During the press conference announcing the bill, a reporter asked what had inspired this rare moment of cooperation. A Republican representative from Ohio responded, "Many of us remember that hearing last fall. It showed that when we move away from heated rhetoric and focus on the facts, there's actually a lot of common ground." He then added with a small grin, "Plus, none of us wanted to be the next person in a viral video getting fact-checked with our own documents."